We are in Exodus chapter 2. Now, just a quick recap. In Exodus chapter 1, when we ended, we read about Pharaoh's decree that all male children born to the Israelites are to be killed. And when we get into chapter 2, we begin a story of Moses. So I will have to tell you that it's Moses, and then we will put some names to some of these people. As we begin in verse 1, a man of the house of Levi. This would be the father of Moses, or Moshe, right? And then he took wife of a daughter of Levi. This would be the mother. So what we can tell is both are from the household of Levi. They are both Levites, pure Levites. The woman conceived and bore a son. This is the style of how the Hebrew expresses. Conceived means there is a conception. Bore a son means there is a birth. So there is always a conception and then a birth. And this time they had a son, a Ben. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, the word beautiful is good. Everything was complete, right? That is basically what the word actually means. He is a complete child. Very pleasant, very agreeable. Everything is intact. He has 2 eyes. He doesn't have 3, that kind of thing. And so the mother hid him for 3 months. That is to wean him. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes. Now, this is important for us to note. An ark here is not a ship. It's like Genesis chapter 6, Noah's ark. This is a box, right? A chest, not a boat, right? And bulrushes here would be the papyrus for him, and what they did was they daubed it with asphalt and pitch. We don't see the Hebrew rhythm here. It is to asphalt it, or asphalt it as a verb. They asphalt it with asphalt and pitch, and these two are the ones that will boil up in the ground. We could call this bitumen, and this could be tar. But basically, they are from the same. It is actually bubbling up from under the ground. And it is for waterproofing. And soon we shall see that the child was put in it, laid in the reeds by the riverbank, and the riverbanks there are filled with reeds sticking up from the river, and these are also the papyrus plants. They use that also for paper, right? And then the sister stood afar off watching. Now, who is this sister? Miriam. So we know that Moses is not the eldest. There was a sister at this point in time. And later on, we also read that he had another brother. And that would be an older brother, Aaron. But right now, this is the beginning of the story of Moses, which means that Moses was affected and not the 2 siblings, because the 2 siblings were born before the decree of Pharaoh in chapter 1. Continuing on the story, we read in verse 5. Verse 5 tells us that there was a daughter of Pharaoh. Now we read Pharaoh. Pharaoh is actually a Hebrew word. It's actually given to the king of Egypt. Pharaoh literally means the great house. And it is also an adaptation of Egyptian language, Pharaoh. But the daughter of the Pharaoh, so which means that this is going to be a very important incident. It is the daughter. She came down to the river to bathe. Now, we don't know what river this is. Could be the Nile River, the main river. And this little basket or the ark or the box made of papyrus is floating down the river alongside the river. And her maidens always is with the daughter of the Pharaoh. And when she saw the little ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, so you notice that then this appears to be a box that is closed or covered. Okay? And when she opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the baby wept. So baby Moshe wept. And she had compassion on him. Now, this is a very important word. This word literally means to have pity. Because she saw a child, right? She saw the child. And what can you do when you look at a child? And so she said, this is one of the Hebrew children, meaning the sons are to be killed. And this one was preserved. So she had pity. So immediately she could tell that the baby was of the Hebrews. So the narrative continues. Verse 7. His sister then appeared. This would be Miriam. Came to the Pharaoh's daughter. No, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women? Why? Because then there's a Hebrew child suitable to be nursed by the Hebrew woman, that she may nurse the child for you. Which also tells us that there may be a certain practice, and maybe the Pharaoh's daughter is not in this mode of taking care of a child, and so the Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yes, go." And the maiden, which is Miriam, went and called the child's mother, which is incidentally her mother. And the Pharaoh's daughter said to the child's mother, "Take this child away, nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." And so the woman took the child and nursed him. Always follow the pronouns. This would be the mother of Moses. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter when he grew up. Now, we don't know how old this child is when he was brought to the Pharaoh's daughter, but he was adopted, became her son. And she called his name Moshe, in verse 10, right? And Moshe literally means to be drawn, or here in this case, drawn from the water. And so if you remember, names are given to symbolize or signify the event so that you can remember. So when you call his name Moshe, she is literally remembering that this child was taken up from the water. And so she explains here, right? Because I drew him out of the water. That's why his name is Moshe. So there is no magic to names, okay? So now, after a while has come, we read in verse 11. He grew up, and he grew up in the palace, and when Moses was grown, in verse 11, Grown means, how should you say, he grew up, he was bigger, he was stronger. That's the word. So he grew up, right? And then he went out to his brethren. This is an important word. The Bible always uses this word, brethren. And in this context, the brethren means people of the same tribe, of the same family, right? Same family or same parents. And in this case particular, they were brethren because they were all Hebrew. And so he looked at their burdens. You remember burdens in chapter 1 means hard labor. That the Pharaoh thought that when the Hebrew people were made to work hard in hard labor and persecuted and oppressed, they will not rise up and overthrow the Pharaoh. And so he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren, and that really upset him. So he looked this way and that way, meaning he was trying to see whether there was anybody there besides him. He saw no one, and so he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, buried him. And he went out the second day. So another day he came, and 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did wrong, "Why are you beating your companion?" The word companion is commonly used in the word neighbor, right? Love your neighbor. So it's actually a companion, a friend, or a fellow citizen. So that would be the idea. Why are you beating your neighbor? If you prefer that word, when you look at the instruction, love your neighbor as yourself. Why are you striking your friend? And so he said, this person who is striking means to hit, and trying to kill, basically, right, is to hit with intent to kill. Why are you doing that? And so he said, this person said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And so what the people saw was that the word prince is important for us to take note. Prince is chief. Just a moment. So the prince is chief, and they were saying, "Are you also going to judge us too?" Judge is judge, right? To pass a judgment. So do you intend to kill me? And this word would be to murder. This is I think this is a very important word. And this word, I think, appears practically many places with intention to kill, to murder the Egyptian. So there were witnesses. And when he thought that there was no one, right? He thought he saw no one, but there were witnesses. So Moses feared. Why did he fear? Because he knew he had done something wrong. Surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. Why? Because there is a retribution. An Egyptian was killed by Moses, and so Pharaoh was angry. And so Pharaoh wanted to kill Moses. An eye for an eye, remember? But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh, and then he went to dwell in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now we need to know how far he had gone. He was in Egypt, and he went to Midian. Midian is believed to be north of Arabia, which means that he would have crossed the Sinai Peninsula in between, and then crossed the Red Sea, and then to the wilderness thereafter. And likely that would be where the Exodus would be as well. So just have an idea, he ran really far away. Now when he went to a well, now that he went to the well, there is now a new story. And the new story starts from verse 16. There was a priest of Midian, the place where he ran. He had 7 daughters, and all 7 of them came and drew water at the well where Moses was sitting. And they filled the troughs to water the father's flock. And then what happened was he was watching. There were other shepherds. The men came and drove them away, so bullying the women. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So Moses is the kind of person who cannot ignore injustice. You can see, he cannot ignore injustice. He has to do something. That's his nature, right? And so when he saw the Egyptian being unjust to his brethren, he killed the Egyptian. Then when he saw the 2 fighting and one trying to kill the other, he had to step in. And then when he was found out, he ran away. Now the third incident here is that the shepherds, the men who had flocks, came to bully the 7 women. And he stood up and helped them and defended. Can you imagine? One man. So he must be a very tough guy. He must be one who is able to fight. He is one who is not afraid of intimidation. So that's the Moses that we should take a look. So the text gives us a flavor of who Moses is, or Moshe is. So when it came to Ruel, now Ruel is a father. That's the name that we are given here at this point in time. In verse 18, Ruel actually have a meaning. And this is a Hebrew meaning. It means friend of God, of El, right? So he was a priest of Midian. His name is Ruel, friend of God. Just bear that in mind, right? And say, how is it that you have come home so soon today? Which means that generally they were always late. Why were they late? Because the shepherds, the men, would chase them away. They would take all the water, and after the men left, only the women continued. And so their answer was this. He says, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the men, the shepherds. And he also drew enough water for us, which means that he did the job of the women to draw water, and he helped water the flock. And so they thought of Moses being an Egyptian. So he said to his daughters, where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Now you notice the Midianites Ruel, as is known here, the father of the 7 women, is very much like Chinese, right? You must be hospitable to the people who have helped you. Call him home, invite him back so that we can have a meal. So you remember, eating bread. Bread is the staple. For the Chinese, come and eat rice. For the Midianites or the Middle Eastern people, they would be breaking bread. And that is actually offered to people that you consider a friend. And so as the Ruel told the daughters, go and call him. So Moses came. And in verse 21, he says, was content to live with the man. Basically, the literal meaning was he was willing to, he was willing, I guess you could say, he was willing to, well, to stay. Because the word live here is to sit. And to sit or to dwell, right, with the man, Ruel. With the man, Ruel, Reuel, friend of God. And how happy was Ruel with Moshe? He gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moshe, and bore him a son. And Moses now have a son by the name of Gershom. What is Gershom? Gershom basically means a foreigner. One who is not a native of the land. So now what is the explanation? I have been a ger in a foreign land. And this word is ger. And so Gershom and ger, same root word. So Gershom is a foreigner, and Moses says, I have been a stranger. I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And what foreign land are we talking about? And this would be Egypt. And that is a remembrance, right, of Moses' life. Now, verse 23. Now, it happened in the process of time. It tells us that a long time passed. And 40 years, we were told, later, right? That the king of Egypt died. The Pharaoh died. The children of Israel groaned. The word groan here is actually sigh in pain. Sorry. They feel pain and they are mourning, groaning. They're making the noise because they're in pain. And the pain is caused by the bondage. The word bondage here literally means hard labor. Hard labor. And they cried out. The word cry out here is actually cry for help. And this cry came up to God. It's interesting. We need to look at this word. The cries went up or ascended to God, which tells us this: they cry on the earth, and the cries went up. So these are all very poetic, pictorial words. The cry went up to God, and the idea here is God is in the up, and it's beyond the earth. And they were crying out because of the hard labor. Verse 24, and God heard. This is important that we can now begin to see the nature of God to the Israelites. They sought God for help, and they cried out for help. And they see God in the above and not on the ground below. And as they cry out to God, the important thing that we need to know is that God is a living God, because he heard, right? God is a living God. You won't be calling out if God is a rock. And so the children of Israel called out to God, and God heard their groans of pain. And then God remembered. It talks about a time when something happened a long time ago and God brought to mind. What was it that God brought to mind? The covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God at this point in time brought to mind. Why now and why not earlier? The reason is, if you go back and read Genesis chapter 15, God says 400 years. And this is the time where the 400 years arrived. And so God brought to mind. So that's how it goes, right? And God looked upon the children of Israel. So we see two words here. God heard and God saw. He looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. And this is another word, acknowledge. And the word acknowledge means to know. So God saw and God heard. One, God saw and God knew them. So the idea here tells us this, that God heard their groans, and after 400 years at this time, God brought back to mind the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now God saw, right? So we could see a few things. I think I've marked it wrongly here. So we could say that this would be number 2, brought to mind. Number 3, to see, and know is number 4. And basically all these are actions of a living God. And God put it all together. Once you put it all together, you can go back and then re-look at Genesis chapter 15. And then you will realize that this is the time, and the narrative is showing that it is going towards the fulfillment of what God said in Genesis chapter 15. So now let us take a quick look at Genesis chapter 15. Now we have here in Genesis chapter 15 in verse 13. And God said to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants that will be after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the tribes are then strangers in a land that is not theirs. And so now we can see that this is Egypt. And remember, Moses named his son strangers in a land that is not theirs. Gershom, a ger, is a stranger. And they will serve the Egyptians, and they will afflict them 400 years. Now, we know for a fact that it is not for the 400 years in total, but there will be affliction upon them, and it will arrive in the 400 years. And so when the time comes, God will listen to them. So along the way, the Pharaoh who did not know Joseph started this affliction. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. And that we will read later on in the book of Exodus, in chapters 12 onwards. It says, in the 4th generation, they shall return here. And so now we're talking about that 4th generation. The 400 years have arrived. And here we come to the end of chapter 2. So that you can see in verse 24 and 25, most important, God is a living God who heard, remembered, looked upon or saw and acknowledged them, and the time has come. So the narrative is actually building up to the fulfillment of Genesis 15. Now, let me say one more thing before we finish. One is that God is a living God. We also see that God is a faithful God. And he is faithful to what he has said to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with regards to his covenant. And so we can see that he is a covenant-keeping God. That at the right time of 400 years in the 4th generation, God brought the fulfillment to the prophecy that he gave to Abraham in that covenant. And so, remember what I told you all right up front, when we look at Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah, what is called the 5 books of Moses, this really is to teach us about God. The whole story here is not about the history. Yes, there is a lot of history, but it is a revelation to tell us who God is. And so here we can see that this has not become fruition, but we can see it in progress. So the story unfolds to tell us that God is a faithful God. God is a living God. And he is a God who hears them, who remembers them, who sees them, and who acknowledges them. And hence the covenant, as promised by God, is to bring them back from this strange land that Moses also called in a foreign land, back to the promised land where God made the promise or the covenant with Abraham. And with this, we complete chapter 2. Any questions?
I have a question, but it's related to the chapter 1.
Yeah.
Just wondering, because during that time, Pharaoh wanted to kill all the son, right? The firstborn. And then how can he accept that his daughter, keep Israelites baby? Didn't he know that? Because he grew up in the place, right?
Well, I think one of the interesting thing is the son was actually brought back. Moses was actually brought back when he was a bit bigger. And the daughter has no problems with it. And I would speculate that the Pharaoh would close an eye because it's the daughter. So not particularly dogmatic about that, because he also allowed a number of the Hebrew boys to be born, because in chapter 1 you see the women who helped the Israelite women give birth. They said that, oh well, the Israelite women gave birth so quickly, You can't do anything about it. But we do see in the archaeology in Egypt that they have found many shallow graves of male babies. And that tells us that Moses was one of those few who survived. So there were many who were killed. Not many actually survived during this time. So we need to appreciate that it is a very sensitive time. And yet, yes, Pharaoh allowed whoever managed to survive, but most of them he managed to kill.
So he knew his identity and
I
let
would say
him,
so, yes.
yeah.
But because it was the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, and I guess as Oriental as Egyptians go, they also favor daughters. Perhaps, I don't know, yeah. And so, of course, since the daughter wanted it, what can you say? It's only one baby, one child. What can one child do?
Yeah.
But interestingly, I think one of the things that we need to remember here is that Moses is a Levite. And soon we will see the importance of the Levite in the nation of Israel.
Median is Arabic, is it Arabic country? Not
The
Israel.
northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, the northern part.
So they are not Israelites.
They are not Israelites. One of the things we could see of Midianites were that they intermarried with the Ishmaelites. And so we saw that in the story where Joseph was sold to the traders who brought him into Egypt. They were both called Midianites and Ishmaelites. And so they were living in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, which borders the present-day Jordan.
So in this story, Moses is marrying not Israelites.
Correct.
So does it actually imply that God does not actually object to mixed marriages?
Yes,
they not
that's
necessarily
true.
they marry the Israelites.
Correct. You would see that Joseph married an Egyptian, daughter of a priest, and now we find Moses also marrying a daughter of a priest. Eventually, we will see what priests are all these, and they seem to have no problems with Jehovah God. And the only prohibition that we see eventually was when we saw in the book of Genesis was that Abraham made very sure that Isaac would not marry a Canaanite woman. So there is a problem with the Canaanites.
Oh, so Canaanites maybe they worship the idols a lot.
Perhaps, yes, perhaps.
And what's
perhaps
the age? What's the age difference between Mariam and Moses?
We don't know really. You find that Aaron and Miriam are both much older than Moses because they would have been born before the edict of this Pharaoh who said, kill all the male children.
Okay.
Only Moses was affected by the decree of Pharaoh.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yes.
In verse 23 here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why does the Israelites only they start groaning after the king of Egypt died? They should be very unique during his ruling time. They should be even suffer, right?
Interesting. So when you read something like this, that the king of Egypt died, and then they groan because of the bondage, would tell us that after this Pharaoh who introduced the hard labor died, the subsequent pharaohs made it worse.
Oh.
So I mean, this would be a way of looking at all this, because when they were first introduced, they never complained that much. They were subjugated so that they do not rise up against the Pharaoh. But it appears that they still grew in number, and the next king of Egypt, they just pressed the button and made it worse.
Wow, the worst is yet to come, like.
Yeah.
So if we able to trace the year, we will know the name of the pharaoh as well, right? During that.
Good question.
Yeah.
This is the problem we have today. The Middle Eastern history is led and governed by Egyptologists. They decide on which pharaoh in which year. And we have found that their Egyptologist chronology is actually off by a few hundred years, which places the Exodus later, which when in turn it should have been earlier. The other thing that you find from Egyptologists is that they maintain that there were no Israelites in Egypt.
So they don't acknowledge
They reject, they do not accept the fact that there were Israelites in Egypt.
Up to now.
Up to now. So they proved it by having their dates off. And so the rest of the civilization around them had problems because they cannot correlate the dates. You know, the Hittites, the Phoenicians, the Moabites, everybody around them had all their dates upset because Egyptology rules, because they have invested so much to determine the kingdom of Egypt. So everybody had to line up against the kingdom of Egypt chronology. And since they maintained that there were no Israelites in Egypt up to today, you will be interested to then learn that there is now a lot of archaeology to provide evidence of Israelites in Egypt. And more as well. I think you could look at the evidence, the patterns of evidence, the Exodus, the movie, and all the documentary. You'll be able to see a lot of these as well.
Yeah, they will found some evidence related to the Red Sea, right? The crossing of the Red Sea.
The location of the crossing, but all those location of crossing, you also have to look at some of the theories, but more importantly, the archaeology would be documents to talk about the 10 plagues, the grave of young male children, and they are not Egyptians. And all these correlate with what we have in the Bible in Exodus chapter 1 and 2, and then ongoing as well. So it is important for us to realize that the history that is given to us is actually accurate, but many people reject it because they do not want to accept the God of the Bible.
But today, in Egypt, their major belief is still, is it Islam?
What has happened is, at this point in time, in Moses' time, that there is no Islam.
Yeah.
So Egyptians has always had their belief systems and brought down because they were a major kingdom, a force to be reckoned with until the time of Assyria. And so they had a very long and powerful history. The Egyptians became Muslims only in the 8th century. Okay? All right. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.